It records it for us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, so we're having a little technical difficulty, but hopefully we'll get a good recording, and the sound will be adequate, and folks can look at it later. What chapter are we on, Mama?
Number 8.
Chapter 8. And share a little bit about the story here. I mean,
This is.
Roger
You wouldn't do
Morneau.
this to me. I wasn't prepared for
Roger
this.
Morneau's story about his experiences when he was younger.
Well, then you go ahead and do the introduction.
Okay, there you go.
Don't ask me to do it all the time. You just catch me off guard, and I'm thinking, what is this? I don't even remember what I'm doing sometimes. This was chapter 8 is called "The Demon Spirits Pressing for a Commitment." One particular evening, as we were conversing with the satanic priest, he mentioned the time had come for both of us to begin exercising faith in the power of the spirits, because the master, using the priest's words, had instructed him that we should. "One of the many gifts is yours to claim," said the priest, "if only you are willing to make an open profession of faith in the master." That profession of faith consisted in taking part in a satanic ritual in which we were to declaim before the assembly that we recognized Satan as a great God, the supreme ruler of planet Earth, willing to bestow great gifts upon believers. We would then claim for ourselves such a gift as we desired. The confession of faith would be sealed by depositing a pinch of powdered incense over live coals on Satan's altar, and then genuflecting before it. My friend Roland had no hesitation in doing so, and again I saw myself pressured by the power of association. Even though I felt like giving the matter some thought before making a decision, my friend gave many reasons why that evening was the ideal time to take that important step. I am ashamed of saying this, but I gave in and went through with it. I asked for the gift of divination to be used in this way. In my sleep at night, I would dream of the names and numbers of racehorses that would be the winners at a particular track the next day. Then I would go to a bookie and bet on them. The very first night I had such a dream, most vividly I saw the winners at 3 racetracks, and the action was shown to take place on the coming Saturday, 3 days away. On the day designated, I proceeded to a bookie, and sure enough, up on the board were the names I had seen in the dream. As a shop worker, I didn't have a great deal of money to play with, so I placed a small amount on the first 2 races and won about $60. The third horse was paying 20 to 1, the reason being that he was far from being a favorite. But realizing the spirits had informed me correctly up to then, I figured I should invest $20. The horse came in first place, and I was the only person in the place to walk up to the cage to collect returns, a total of $420. I picked up the cash, said thank you, and walked out. Walking tall over my newly found good fortune, I proceeded down St. Catherine Street to one of the many fine men's shops, and bought myself a tailor-made suit of clothes costing about $200.
This is back in the 1940s or 50s? No, 50s.
I think this would be in the 50s, yeah.
So that's 60 years ago.
Similar experiences took place on Saturdays, but it wasn't long before the owner of the bookie had his manager bring me into his office and wanted to have a chat with me. After conversing for a while, he realized I didn't know much about the history of horse racing. "I am amazed," he said, "over the fact that having such little knowledge of the subject of horse racing, you invest your money so wisely. Do you mind telling me who feeds you valuable information?" When he realized he was getting nowhere with me, he said, "You and I have to part company. You are too costly to have in my establishment. You are getting too much of my money. I'd like you to leave this place and don't come back. If you need the addresses of other bookies in Montreal, I am willing to give you a list of them." I thanked him for his willingness to help and left. That sudden prosperity was nice to experience, but in reality it didn't make me truly happy. Somehow it brought no contentment to my heart. Whereas my friend was having what he called the best time of his life, by the spirits working fantastically for him, I had reservations concerning my involvement with those folks, such as regarding the praise sessions to the gods. One particular evening, I had an experience that really went against my grain. After many people had given testimonies of what the spirits had done for them in benefiting their lives, the satanic priest suggested we all go down to the worship room and have a praise session to the gods. He made one statement that really startled me. "We will speak the language of heaven," he said. "This experience makes our master and the chief counselors very happy." His statement puzzled me, but I felt it was probably best not to ask how devil worshippers could speak the language of heaven. Once seated in the worship room, everyone was given a church hymnal, and I mean a Christian church hymnal. In fact, the priest mentioned 3 Christian denominations using that particular hymnal. Talk about profanities and blasphemies being directed at the great life-giver of the galaxies. In my estimation, there is nothing that humans could do to equal this. After the satanic priest had performed a short ritual before Satan's altar in words of dedication to him, he told the assembly to turn to a particular hymn and sing along with him. I will not at this time give the names of the hymns that were sung because they are sacred to me today, and writing the titles down while talking about that experience I feel would be a desecration in itself. However, I will say they were mostly all concerning our precious Lord and Savior. That must have continued for 20 minutes. While everyone continued singing, I didn't utter a word. I was almost in a state of shock. After it was all over and we were walking back upstairs, the satanic priest came to me and smiled and said, "I noticed you didn't take part in our praise session to the gods. Do you mind telling me why?" "Sir, I just couldn't profane those Christian hymns in the way you people did. The fact that I don't like someone is no reason I should sing profanities regarding his name." He took up the conversation by saying, "I understand the way you feel. After a while you will adjust to this and all will be well. It's like the first time a person witnesses a live animal sacrifice. It's a shock to one's mind, but after witnessing it a couple of times, they don't mind it anymore. By the way, we are planning to have you and Roland come with us to celebrate our high feast to the gods at a resort we have in the Laurentian Mountains. November 1st is a very sacred day for our people. I'll tell you more about it next week when we meet again." As we drove home that evening, I asked George if he could clarify an observation I had made during the praise session. I had observed that after the people had sung for a while, some of them began to use a language other than French, yet the melody was still that of the Christian hymn. He explained that those individuals had become possessed by the spirits taking control of their minds, causing them to praise the gods, Satan and his chief counselors, in spirit language, thus enabling humans to worship them in a more elevated form of adoration. This type of service, he explained, has a dual purpose. First, the fact that demon worshippers are singing Christian hymns is in itself a way of highly deriding the name of Christ. Second, the act of demon spirits taking control of the minds of some of the singers and praising God and his chief counselors in spirit language to the melody of a Christian hymn actually constitutes the highest form of blasphemy against the God of heaven, and that pleases Satan exceedingly. In addition to the above, my attention had been arrested a number of times by references having been made about live animal sacrifices, so I asked George to tell us about it. He explained that on November 1st, such sacrifices are carried out by their people at a specific place in the mountains, but he preferred having the priest explain things to us. It turned out that it was never explained. In that meeting of the following week was the last one I attended with demon worshippers. The subject never came up because our attention that evening was centered on an entirely different subject. Unbeknown to me at the time, the fallen angels became aware that the life-giver was working in the affairs of men to shortly bring me to a position in life where I could hear of his great love and for undeserving human beings, his great plan of redemption, and God's righteous character in dealing with humans. The spirits then determined to quickly pressure me into a deep commitment of faith. By this I mean commit myself to the spirits past the point of no return, as I will explain shortly. On that particular Wednesday evening, as I entered our place of worship, I was far from realizing that I was doing so for the last time. As I shook hands with those friendly people who had gone out of their way to make us feel a part of their group in order to please the spirits, it would have been impossible for me to think that just 10 days later, the same people would be changed into vicious enemies, planning my destruction, and willing to spend large sums of money to put out a contract on my life. The testimonial session was very impressive, and after it was over, the satanic priest had a short talk with my friend and I, telling us that the spirits were most anxious to benefit our lives in a very special way, and that on November 1st, just 2 weeks away, by making a definite commitment of faith in the spirits in a service of initiation into their secret society, the spirits would then reveal to us their plans for our life work. As I asked the priest why we had to go through the initiation ritual before the spirits would tell us their plans for us, he explained that it was a matter of exercising faith in the spirits, that without faith it was impossible to please their masters, and that pleasing him would in turn result in many benefits to ourselves. He went about proving his point in this manner. Gentlemen, please come with me. I'd like to have you hear how the Master rewards people for exercising faith in him. We proceeded to a room where earlier that evening, as I passed by the closed door, I heard a fantastic chattering of typewriters. He knocked and someone responded, "Please come in." You guys all know what typewriters are, right?
Computer, click, 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 click.
They were the first keyboards. He knocked and someone responded, "Please come in." When we walked in, we found a man working at stuffing large brown envelopes with stacks of legal-sized typewritten material. "Julian, you've met these men before," said the priest, "but I doubt they know your occupation and how the spirits have benefited your life while you were doing good for others. So I brought them in to have them hear from you personally about your experience with the spirits once you were initiated." The man went on to tell us that as a young attorney, he saw himself destined to spend his life researching reference materials for court cases handled by a large law firm. But good fortune came to him when by the leading of the spirits, he became acquainted with demon worship, and his life was changed overnight. After initiation into the group, the spirits informed him they were calling him to do a special work for those who had committed crimes against society and were not getting the legal help they should be getting to avoid spending time in jail. He was to immediately start his own business, offering lawyers the unique service of preparing briefs for court cases that involved criminals going to trial. The spirits would do most of the work. They informed him that letters had been sent to certain French lawyers throughout Canada, informing them of his specialty in the field of supplying attorneys with all needed materials to fight and win court cases, the likes of which in times past had been lost due to the lack of what it takes to make their efforts a success. In no time at all, replies began coming in. Next, the spirits told him all he had to do was to work in the house of worship every Wednesday to take advantage of their help. His efforts consisted in feeding paper into 3 typewriters until the spirits were done setting up each brief into until they were done setting up each brief in its entirety. On the table in front of him were the typewriters and about 50 piles of paper. They were anywhere between 1/2 inch in thickness to about 3 inches. He explained that all material had been typed as fast as he could feed it into the 3 typewriters. It contained the proper procedures to follow in court and also case histories of similar cases tried in the past. When the priest asked him how his services were accepted, he declared the attorneys were just plain delighted using his services because the results were so great. Again, the priest asked about how much money the work before him represented. He said thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars. We chatted a bit, and as we were leaving, the gentleman invited us to come in and observe the spirits at work whenever we found ourselves in the building and he was occupied with his project. The satanic priest was strengthened in his position of asking for a commitment of faith in the spirits, or in other words, to have us tell him that we were willing to be initiated in their cult. My friend gave him a yes answer, but I could not. "Sir, I am sorry to say, but I cannot give you an answer immediately. Next week at this time I will give you a definite answer whether I will take that important step then or at a later date." Not realizing it, I was shaking hands with the satanic priest for the last time, and then I left. After going to bed that night, I was unable to sleep. I kept thinking about initiation into the satanic cult. Should I go through with it or not? The experience of the past few months kept passing before me. Many unanswered questions regarding the forces of good and evil placed themselves before my mind. Even though I had discovered many amazing facts about the supernatural, I still felt there was a lot more to it all than I had been made aware of. I realized that demon spirits could not be trusted completely in the claims they made concerning what they declared to be God's unfair dealings toward them. It meant my taking up a trade of doing embroidery work for a firm that specialized in that type of service to the dress manufacturing firms in Montreal. During this time I was working my embroidery machine. I was thinking about the decision I had to make within a week. By Friday afternoon, I had come to the decision that I had no other choice than to go through with it. What I didn't realize at the time was that the Spirit of the living God was moving in the affairs of men in a way to reveal to me, an undeserved human being, the Lord of God's love and grace. So the next one is From Demon Worship to Bible Study.
Okay, so obviously we have heard as we come up through chapter 8 here how how Roger was kind of playing around a little bit. He was definitely curious as to what this power was that these people had had become engrossed in. And he could even see some of the tangible benefits, right? He was given.
He had the tangible benefits. He was getting information from his dreams.
Right. So this is one of the ways, of course, that the enemy will snag people and get them into a snare. He will enrich them, and like we talked originally, there was this advantage that people think that they receive when they start playing around with the forces of evil. And typically, the forces of evil present themselves as something very positive, don't they? Or else there would be no appeal. Right?
The thing I noticed is that they only give worldly things. They only give you
Yeah.
the desires that you
Temporal things.
selfishly want.
Things that are not permanent.
Yeah, they only give you those things. They
Yeah.
can't give you anything more.
Right, because and of course, as contrasted to what God offers, which is
Everything.
the eternal, right? The eternal. At any rate, there was a radio show that's been out for a long time called Unshackled. Some of you probably are familiar with it.
Yeah, I've heard that. In fact, I've listened to it
Years.
while I was driving the truck.
Yeah, and it's about people that, in one way or another, were held captive. They were in bondage. They were enslaved in some vice or whatever. And just like Roger is seeing here, there is an alternative. There is a way of escape. And of course, the radio program highlights what these people go through to find salvation and so forth. And so that's really what this book is about that we're reading through. And that should encourage all of us, right? Because particularly if you are a Christian, you have a big bullseye on your back. I mean, you're target number one. But the Bible says, he who is in me is greater than he who is in the world. Okay? So we've read the story, and what does the story indicate? What does the book say? Christianity wins. Okay? The Christianity becomes the winner. No matter what it seems to look like, no matter what other opinions are expressed, God's people win. Because God is a winner. And unfortunately, even though the Bible also indicates that the majority will go down the broad road. Remember, Jesus talked about the broad road and the narrow road? The broad road may seem like it's the right way to go because so many people are going that way. But when you see so many people going one way, you ought to really consider going the other way. That's Scripture. Scripture says the straight and narrow path are those who will find salvation. At any rate, we'll pick up the story next week and learn more of how he untangles himself from this web. And that's what happens to us, we weave this web that entangles us and ensnares us, and God has to miraculously set us free. But we have to be willing to receive that salvation, don't we? Anyway, we'll pick that up a little bit later. Okay, excuse me, a little congested this morning. All right, so we're back in Revelation here. We're still in chapter 2, and we're looking at, I think we're picking it up in verse 13. Is that what it is? Chapter 2, actually verse 12. A statement I wanted to read first before we get started here. And this is out of a book called Testimonies, Volume 6. It says, if our people were half awake, if they realized the nearness of the events portrayed in the Revelation, a reformation would be wrought in our churches, and many more would believe the message. We have no time to lose. God calls upon us to watch for souls as they must give an account. Advance new principles. Crowd in the clear-cut truth. It will be as a sword cutting both ways. But be not too ready to take a controversial attitude. There will be times when we must stand still and see the salvation of God. Let Daniel speak. Let Revelation speak and tell what is truth. But whatever phase of the subject is presented, uplift Jesus as the center of the hope, the root and offspring of David and the bright and morning star. That was written over 150 years ago. And, as we go through these messages to these churches, one of the applications that you'll hear about is that, this church represents what took place in the church at a certain period in time. All right? Not only was there a message for that literal congregation, Pergamos was there in Asia Minor, one of the 7 churches that were selected to receive this message. So obviously there was a benefit for them personally, right? Oh yeah, right on cue there.
Yeah.
Okay. But not only was there a benefit for them literally, but this also represented a period of time that the church itself collectively would go through. And my Bible subtitles this particular church the Compromising Church. I don't know if you have a heading like that or not. Compromising Church. So let's go through like we've done before. We'll go verse by verse. We're going to go from 12 to 17. So that's just, 6 verses? So twice as many, almost twice as many as we looked at last week.
I heard some interesting background this week about Pergamos, the town itself, or the city itself.
Go ahead.
That if you go back in history and look, that the Roman Empire didn't worship the ruler as God until a certain point in history, when I think it was Julius Caesar came along, and Pergamos was the city that was responsible for instituting that.
Right.
So it became a turning point in history, because for the first time they were now treating their emperor as a deity. Whereas before they'd always worshipped other gods of the Roman and Greek system. Now suddenly they switched over to, and that kind of flavors the way you look at this about Satan's seed is and everything.
That's a big step.
It's huge.
It's a huge step. Right. We'll talk more about that specifically. Any other comment, or is that what you wanted to start with?
It was one of those things that just happened to stick in my mind as I was listening to a message about the 7 churches.
Okay, so verse 12, and to the angel of the church in Pergamos. Over the last 2 weeks, when we were looking at Ephesus and Smyrna, each message starts the same way, right? And when it says angel, is it talking about a heavenly being, or is it talking about an individual, a committed pastor, a dedicated and faithful person? The word means messenger, right? So technically it could be either or both, right? Either or both. Now, the word here does identify an individual. And who is that? Look at the next. Look at verse 13 there. Who's identified there? Who's my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr? So here we have again Who was the messenger that we considered last week? You remember?
Polycarp.
Polycarp, yeah.
Okay. He was specifically mentioned as one that had been the leader of the church in Smyrna. The message goes to him, and what is he supposed to do with it? Pass it on to his congregation, right? And then his congregation is supposed to do what with it? Pass it on to everybody that they know. Okay, so that's the way it works. All right, and of course Polycarp was martyred as well during the time about 168 A.D. So he, of course, lived during the time of Diocletian, and there was quite a bit of persecution that took place in that particular period of time, from 100 A.D. to about 350 A.D. in that period. So we're talking about now a period of time after that. Persecution was the mainstay. There were 10 separate persecution events throughout that period of time back in the church. Polycarp is just one of the ones that's mentioned there. But what happens, what lesson did God's people learn from that experience that brings them up to this period of time, and what did the enemy learn also during that time? You got a church collectively that's going through continued persecution, pretty severe. The Diocletian persecution lasted for a period of 10 years, 303 to 313 A.D., most scholars believe. And did the church learn anything from all of that? What would the church learn from severe persecution?
To trust him more?
Okay, it would be definitely a faith-building or absolute trust perspective, because we're talking life or death now. It's not about convenience or inconvenience. We're talking life or death. Okay? So they've got to learn to trust him implicitly if they're going to continue down the straight and narrow path. What does the enemy learn from this kind of thing?
What not to do, or how to better fight.
What not to do. And I think what you're saying is, what he learned is that God will not allow his message to be stamped out through persecution by force.
Yeah.
And force ultimately will cause the truth to spread, because now you have a group of highly committed believers, right? Trusting totally in their God. That has a tremendous influence and impact on society in general. And so what the enemy begins to learn is, you know what? I'm going at this the wrong way. This is the wrong approach. And so here we come to Pergamos, a compromising church. Instead of continuing with persecution, I mean, it's actually, of course, in the 3rd century, Constantine comes along and he just declares himself to be a Christian, marches his entire army through a river, baptizing them all, right? Mm-hmm. And pretty much tries to unite his empire by facilitating
Christianity.
the pagans.
Yeah.
Right? He wants to
so
facilitate the pagan. He realizes that there's no way to stamp out. If the last 250 years taught them anything, they began to realize we can't stamp this out. This is not going to go away. When people are determined and people set their minds to believe in something, kill them off, and kill one off and 5 more spring up.
Instead, he gave him a fun alternative.
Right. So let's try to let's move in a different direction, and that's where we come to the church of Pergamos. Now, according to tradition, John ordained Antipas, and even the word Antipas, anti meaning against, right, or in place of, and pas meaning father. So, I mean, actually his name was, against the Papa, the father, what would become the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope of Rome. So even his name was the antithesis of all that Rome was trying to promote, and he was against it. And of course, the Pope is Antichrist. Why? Is he against principles of Christianity?
Evidently, because
Not necessarily.
he wrote his
Because-
own.
Because he claims to be.
Not necessarily against them, but in place of.
Yeah.
He sets himself up in place of God. That's why in the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith, the Pope claims to be God on earth, setting himself up in place of God. And if he puts out encyclical letters, and bulls as they're called, instructing the people within his congregation, within his bounds, what does he really set himself up to be?
God on
The Holy
earth.
Spirit. The Holy Spirit. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to direct you. I'm going to impress you to go in a certain direction. And of course, that's That's in place of God. Not a good position to take. All right. So Antipas is actually martyred in 92 A.D. under Domitian, and Domitian, I think, is the guy.
Domitian.
Okay, maybe it is Domitian, Domitian. Domitian. He's the younger brother of who? Remember we talked about him before? He's the younger brother of General Titus. Remember Titus, right? Who, the one that conquered, and he's the one that was responsible for conquering Jerusalem in 70 AD. Well, here's his younger brother. That's the emperor now, and Antipas is martyred. And he, of course, has established a foundation of faith in the city of Pergamus, but eventually that ends up being compromised. And that's really what John is recording here.
Have you ever seen that little strip on the back of a car about that long? It's got the Jewish star, and you got the moon, and you got all these different denominations sign on there.
Mm-hmm.
It says coexist.
They had a church, I think, over there that was trying to get all the different denominations, as the same, becoming worship in the.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this ecumenism, to try to pull everybody together. After all, we all believe in the same God, so why not just put our differences aside and come and worship together?
They say.
Yeah. Yeah, so they say.
I think that's what they was trying to do there,
Revelations that shuts down things
accept
like that.
everything in the church.
Talks about the unity being bad.
Okay, so this is the church era of compromise. It's during the time that the focus of the Messiah's mission, or during this particular time of compromise, that's when, through the name itself, God makes a statement defining really the mission of the Messiah, and it's a startling declaration. What does the word Pergamus actually mean? Anybody take the time to look that up?
Elevation?
Okay, they say that it means elevation or height, and of course one of the reasons that they might say that is because Pergamus was an elevated city, about 1,000 feet above sea
Is it
level.
related at all to purgatory?
Some people might might think that.
I'm just because the words are similar is the only reason I was
Yeah,
asking.
Pergamus. Well, actually, Pergamum, M-O-M, was I think the original name of the city. The city goes back, just like Ephesus. The city had 1,000-year-old history. Went back to like 1100 BC. So it had quite a history to it already. And what do you think the ideology and the theology of the city was? In fact, well, they really didn't even have a theology, but it was a tradition and customs and philosophy was all based on paganism
Yeah.
and heathenism, right?
So pretty much nothing.
They had several temples there. One, the most notable was which one? Do you know?
The Greek god that was responsible for the cure.
Right. The most notable one they had was Zeus. How many of you have ever heard of the Greek
Yeah.
god of Zeus?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Out of
Zeus.
lightning, God.
Right. And actually, let's see.
Zeus and Thor.
It says Pergamus was a city of temples, the most important of which was the temple of Zeus. This temple was dedicated to Asclepius,
Asclepius.
Sepulus, the serpent god,
Yeah,
or god of healing.
that's where the medical symbol came from, with the serpent on the staff.
Right.
Oh, really?
Right, exactly.
The
The,
Greeks and Romans came to worship it as a god.
Right, right, the medical.
So why is the serpent,
Serpent.
seen as medical or as healing?
Because of the experience of Moses with the children of Israel in the wilderness, when the serpents came and bit them, God told them to make a brass pole and put a brass serpent on it, and when they look at it, they would be healed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you never read that story?
I think I have, but I just
Yeah.
don't remember it.
Didn't
Is
connect it.
As they're
Didn't
going
connect
through
it,
the. Well, anyway, this man instructing serpent who gave man the knowledge of good and evil. The living serpent was always kept in the temple of Zeus as an object of worship. Famous school of medicine was also located there, the emblem of which was the serpent twisted around the pole. So it's just interesting when you go back and you begin to see
Does
where
this
a lot of
medical
these
practice still exist?
these things came from.
To stare at the snake?
It says this has come down to us as the emblem of the medical profession today. So that's kind of an interesting little tidbit there. During this time of compromise, God is going to proclaim even through the name. Now the name in the Greek is elevated or height, but it also means an elevated perspective of unity. And so, in some references, when you look up the meaning of the word, it's going to say elevated or marriage or married. Okay, and what is a marriage? What does it mean to be married? A marriage is an at-one-ment. Okay, two becoming one. And so here you have in Pergamus this concept, this elevated theory of two becoming one, or this elevated theory of the atonement, at one-ment, right? And this goes in line with, if you go back and look at the message at the seven churches, what was Ephesus? Ephesus meant permitted, right? Some say desirable, but actually the word itself means permitted. What did Smyrna mean?
Sweet
Myrrh,
smelling savor.
right? Sweet smelling savor, okay?
Smelling Smith.
Sweet smelling savor.
It is hard to do all those S's.
Right. All right, so what's starting to progress here? What's starting to progress is that if this is a revelation of, this is about, of course, individual churches, congregations, but this is about the church's experience in different periods of time. But what's the ultimate meaning that we're talking about here? It's a revelation of Messiah
Christ.
and his mission. Revelation of Messiah and his mission. So, who is permitted to play the significant role in the plan of salvation? Who was permitted to play that role, to take that role? It was the Son of God. He was permitted. And that would be to the Father a sweet-smelling savor. Okay, that's Ephesians chapter 5, 1 and 2. Right? And it would involve an elevated theory of the atonement. Right? And so what we're starting to see is we're starting to see a picture being presented through the meaning of the names. Just like when you look at Adam and Seth and Mahalalel and all these different patriarchs described in Genesis chapter 5, going down to Noah and Methuselah before that. What do those names actually mean? Well, if you understand what the meanings of the names are, you understand that it's talking about what would take place to the antediluvian world, to those that lived before the flood. Okay? And so God does that a lot of times. He will use typically names to describe His activity, a revelation of His
Easy to
activity.
explain people's
By
names
making
too.
them- yeah, by
Or
making
explain who
them.
they are.
That's why in the Jewish culture, in the Hebrew culture, giving a child a certain name, there was an expectation that that child would live up to the meaning of that name. Okay? You guys have heard that before, right?
No,
They would
name.
live
That's
up to.
why-
There was this expectation. They
Live
would
up
just
to the name.
That's why Nebuchadnezzar renamed them when he brought them into Babylon.
Yeah. So
Names were a lot more important in scripture in Bible times than they are today.
of course,
Today people name them after their favorite TV show
soap
or
opera,
soap
star,
opera or whatever.
athlete, or whatever it might be. Something
And so
insignificant.
people use all kinds of dumb names now that don't have any real significance, that don't matter in the grand scheme of things. But
Okay.
Which is why God renames us when we get there.
that's right, we get a new name.
That's
All right.
a dumb name. Let me give you a good one.
So now here's the one that is responsible for the message to Pergamos. These things saith he who has this sharp two-edged sword. And what does that? Any significance there?
Well, it just says Jesus spoke those words.
Right. What does a double-edged sword signify?
Cuts both sides.
His voice is like a two-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it's just barking at something random.
Okay, what's the significance of a double-edged sword? It denotes authority, right? It's also known as a crusader, so the Knights Templar used to carry a double-edged sword. It's known as a crusader sword. Right?
Cuts both ways.
Cuts both ways. Right? So it means might, it means authority, it means discernment. Right? And so Jesus is saying right from the start here, what I'm about to share with you, what I'm about to tell you, reveal to you, is from the one who knows, and the one who has ultimate authority. It's a Review and Herald article here. It says, the truth is the truth. It's not to be wrapped up in beautiful adornings, that the outside appearance may be admired. The teacher is to make the truth clear and forcible to the understanding and to the conscience. The word is a two-edged sword, cuts both ways. Does not tread as with soft, slippered feet. So, God is not going to beat around the bush. He's going to tell it like it is. He wants people to not to misunderstand, but to recognize the condition that they're in and make a change. This phrase here, I know your works, that appears in all of the churches. How can Jesus make that declaration, I know your works? I mean, this is
He knows-
500 years after he was here, right?
He knows the beginning from the end.
Yeah. What does it say in chapter 1? I'm walking in the midst of the candlesticks. What do the candlesticks represent?
Churches.
The churches. I'm walking in the midst of the candlesticks. That's why he can say, I know your works. I'm right there with you. Okay? And he's with us through his Spirit, right? With us through his Spirit. He says, I know your works and where you dwell. And incidentally, that's where Satan's throne is. Now we're starting to get into what Rose was mentioning earlier. Okay? There's a direct link between ancient Babylon and Rome itself. There's a distinct link between ancient Babylon and Rome. Now, what was going on in ancient Babylon? What kind of worshipers were they? Were they the worshipers of the true God? Not at all.
Why they were
Yeah.
separated.
Right. They were interested in the mystics and the cults.
Building a
and
tower.
Sun worship was their thing. Child sacrifice was their thing. They had multiple gods, etc. They didn't have the true God. There's a direct link between ancient Babylon and Rome. And what's that connecting link? Pergamus. Pergamus was the connecting link between ancient Babylon, the cults and the heathenism of ancient Babylon, and the city of Rome and the Roman Empire.
This day and time, you wouldn't think that was going on, but Rose just read it.
This is only like, what, like, it's only 50 years ago? 60 years ago?
Yeah,
Let me,
It's still
it's
going
going
on.
on all the time today, we just aren't really aware of
Well,
it.
because we're not a part of the Satanic Church, so. At least I hope not.
People are significantly less spiritual, even than they were 50 years ago.
Absolutely. We've become so materialistic, we don't need God anymore.
That's why I have pop stars.
okay, who was it that overthrew Babylon?
Medo-Persia.
Medo-Persia.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so the Persians. So when the Medo-Persians overthrew Babylon, they gave the inhabitants of the city their freedom, it says here. But the Babylonian priests, they later led a revolt, and when they did that, they were driven from the city. And these were also known, you probably heard the other term, instead of Babylonian priests, you probably heard Chaldean before? Heard that term before? Chaldean. The defeated Chaldeans fled to Asia Minor and fixed their central college at Pergamus. Okay, that's where they went, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting how this author, this is from William B. Barker. It's interesting the wording he uses here. He says, and took the palladium of Babylon, the cubic stone with them. That is really an interesting phrase. What's palladium? Anybody know what palladium is? What does it sound like?
Sounds
Looks like a
uranium.
metal.
Sounds like
some kind of nuclear element.
Polonium. It sounds like, well, not polonium, but that's something else. But
Well,
It's-
the suffix of IUM indicates some type of radioactive property.
it's a radioactive element. So they took the radioactive cubit stone. Now, what's a cubit stone?
A stone that's a cubit big.
Stone that's a cubit. It's denoting the standard, right? I mean,
Just the standard measurement of the stone?
Standard that was recognizable and common.
So they did their measurements with a radioactive stone. That sounds really healthy.
Must have been like a meteorite or something.
Yeah. They took the palladium of Babylon. No, they took the radioactive. Something that's radioactive is deadly, right? So they took the deadly philosophy from Babylon and they made that the standard in Pergamus. Got that? They took the deadly radioactive cultic heathenistic philosophy of Babylon and they made that the standard in Pergamus. Pretty interesting. It says here, independent of state control, they carried on the rights of their religion. And it was,
Had a land of freedom.
it says, Pergamus therefore became the seat of the satanic system of the Babylonian mysteries. And then, of course, what happened after that was, who's the guy? They had
I would assume they were conquered by Alexander the Great later, and then by the Romans.
Right. But it was, even though they were conquered by Alexander the Grecian Empire, they had their own for the guy's name. There was a whole line of kings that I mean, he's definitely identifying the fact that this is where Satan's seat is, right? In 133 BC, Baal worship, sun worship, the standard now invades Rome, and it was taken to Rome by
You're going back to my room.
let's see. Let's see what I got there. I know the name of the kings. Let's see it on here now.
Radium is not radioactive.
Anyway, there were a line of kings. That I don't recall the name of the kings, but anyway, in 133 BC, they basically turned over their sovereignty to the Roman emperor, and that's how they became under. That's how they developed under the Roman rule. And that was 100 years. That was 400 years before this period of time actually takes place. Okay, I wanted you to recognize here, chapter 2. This is where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name, do not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you. Well, let me stop right there. This was a stronghold for this Babylonian mystery religion that came from Babylon. It became the stronghold there. But what else? What else was Pergamus most notable for? And I want to draw this connection for you. They had a library, for example, that rivaled the library in Alexandria. They had over 200,000 volumes of books in their library there. So they had it was a real hub. It was a real educational city. Academia flourished in Pergamus for hundreds of years.
I guess so, if they had medical type advances.
Okay, they were highly technical in their medical advancement, etc. So it was like a college, university town, with medicine, with academia in general.
I read that they kind of because Egypt also had a big one, so yeah, so like I forget the word right now. They were competing. They were like competing with Egypt.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like competitive because Egypt also had a huge library.
Right. Now, in that competition process, Egypt decided to pull a fast one on Pergamus, and they decided, hey, we can get one up on them by simply refusing to sell them paper.
Mm-hmm.
What was the paper that Egypt had developed? The Egyptians had developed.
What was it?
Yeah. What's the name for it?
Parchment?
Papyrus. Okay, so Egypt refused to sell them any more papyrus, thinking that, well, this is going to give us the advantage. There won't be any other people won't be able to take notes and do term
Write stuff
papers
down.
and things of that nature. And so, what did they do? You know what
They made
they
their
did?
own paper.
Huh?
Probably made their own
They
paper.
made their own paper, but what did they make it from? Specialized process of animal skins called
Parchment?
parchment. And in German, it's called pergamen. Or in German, it's called,
I never heard of this stuff.
yeah. It's called Pergament in German. Pergament, named after the city that developed it. So they had it was a progressive city, tremendously. For manufacturing, for medical technology, huge educational system. Also, you guys remember when Alexander died, who stepped in and took the place of Alexander the Great?
4 generals?
Okay, 4 generals. One of those generals was named Lysimachus. Okay? And Lysimachus had his personal wealth stored in Pergamus. And the reason he did is because they had a sophisticated treasury there, like a Fort Knox. He had his personal wealth of $10 million stored at Pergamus at the central treasury.
That's what it would value today.
Maybe.
Well, that's a lot of money back then.
Maybe
10 mil at the
Yeah.
time.
10 million. Yeah. It just says that he had. So look at all the things that, where Satan's seat is it becomes a thriving progressive culture. It's like anybody and everybody wants to be there. And the money is there, the manufacturing is there, the colleges are there, academia is there,
Is that still rolling?
all this stuff. Now, Pergamus doesn't exist today. Well, it exists under a different name in Turkey, but not Pergamus.
It's not the thriving metropolis.
Yeah, it's
it
not
was
the
for-
thriving. If there's in close by in the area, there's a different name of a different city there. But this was like a hub of culture and activity, and so usually when you find all of those elements, the money and academia and manufacturing and this, all these things in one place, you're also going to find that Satan is going to want to be there full bore, right? Yeah, why not create another world empire, right? Why not create another? So you got all these things that are there. Verse 14 says, "But I have a few things against you, even though you're faithful amidst all of this competition." I mean, because what is money? What's money considered versus Christianity? What does it become? It becomes a competitor, right? It becomes a competitor. People are after the almighty whatever. If it's $1 or yen or whatever it might be, that becomes the main focus for a lot of folks. So it becomes a competition against the truth.
The love of money.
What about education? Education becomes competition to the truth.
The science
see?
evolution.
How about political power and ambition becomes competition to Christianity? You see, so you got all these things. Even though there's faithful folks there, Satan develops all this competition against Christianity. What did Jeremiah the prophet say? Let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, right? Let not the wealthy man glory, or the rich man glory in his riches. Right? Let not the mighty man glory in his might, but let him that glorieth glory in what?
This, that he knows.
Jesus Christ. Right? Jesus Christ, the most important thing. So these guys are living, these faithful folks in Pergamus have a tremendous amount of competition. Is that anything like today?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's very much like today. I mean, this is a microcosm. This is a little snapshot, a little glimpse of what we live with day in and day out in our own society, in the Western culture, right? It's all about money and education and power and so forth and control, right?
At least for the higher ups, yeah.
But he says, I have a few things against you because there are those who hold the doctrine of Balaam. And of course, yeah, but who's he talking to here? I mean, Balaam, the doctrine of Balaam is all around. The doctrine of Baal worship and sun worship is all over the place, right? It's the seat of Satan. But what's he saying here? Who's he talking to here when he says, I have somewhat against you? He's talking to the church, right? He's talking to the church, isn't he? Yeah. Who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel. Who was Balak? Remember Balak and Balaam, the story?
The bull
The
god.
donkey.
Remember they came together and Balaam was supposed to be a high priest of the Most High God, but what did he like more than that?
Money.
Ooh, money. Okay, so Balak came and was bribing him, and what did Balak want him to do?
To curse Israel.
Curse Israel. Israel's marching around through the wilderness, conquering all these kind of things and whatnot. and there was this fear, and so Balak said, "Hey, I know what we can do. We can get somebody to curse them, and then they won't have the advantage." And what happened every time Balaam was trying to curse Israel?
He would bless them.
A blessing came out instead. And ultimately, he finally said, "Who can curse what God has blessed? Who can curse what God has blessed?" But then they devised a plan. What was the plan that they devised to take God's people down?
Send in the
That's the
women.
same thing that they're dealing with here. It was compromise, right? Compromise. And they sent the heathen women in to cause compromise.
Invite them to some parties.
Yeah, just come on, let's whatever. And so compromise became the thing here. And it became a stumbling block to the children of Israel. They were even eating things sacrificed to idols, it says here, and committing sexual immorality. So basically the same thing that happened back then is being repeated. There's nothing new under the sun, right?
It's happening all over.
It's happening again. I mean, look, Satan knows, he's a master at recognizing what works and what doesn't work. He's had thousands of years of practice. And so what's worked in the past, he implements again, right? And it's happening at this period of time in church history.
I think it's easy for him to take advantage too, because we have such a short lifespan. Our memory
Yes.
span is also twice as short too.
Yeah. What's
So
the
we don't remember all the things that Abraham did like they did, or
Yeah. What's the saying? When we forget what has transpired in history,
History repeats.
we often repeat it.
Yeah.
And that's because we do forget how detrimental it is. So, yeah. Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. What was the Nicolaitans about?
The from what we had discussed last time, it was about the
Group of people that ignored the law, essentially.
Right.
Did what was right in their own eyes, and
Did was right in their own eyes, kind of wrote their own gospel, so to speak. It's interesting that it says here, it says the Nicolaitans' heresy condemned by Christ in the letter to the Ephesians. Remember, we came across these in the first church as well. Has developed from deeds on the part of a few. In Revelation 2:6, remember, under the first church, there were the deeds of a few that are being expressed as a concern, to now becoming a doctrine within the church. So this thing has again, ideologies, sometimes take a little while to take root, and once they take root, they start to grow. If the soil is a little bit fertile, they start to grow and flourish. And this is how compromise takes place, little by little, slow, methodically, intentionally. And you turn around, and all of a sudden, man, you got this full-fledged plant that is spewing out its poison, right? And it says, here's a guy named Ramsey, says, this school of thought and conduct played an important part in the church of the first century. It was evidently an attempt to effect a reasonable compromise with the established usage of the Greco-Roman society, and to retain as many as possible of those usages in the Christian system of life. So, and he says here primarily it was affected most of all the cultured and well-to-do classes in the church, those who had most temptation to retain all that they could of the established social order and customs, etc. So, one of the things that I've even recognized as I've been a part of congregations over the 4 decades that I've been a Christian, is that the organization seems to bend over backwards or kowtow to those that have resources and money and wealth. You ever notice that? If you have wealth, or you have potential for large offerings and donations to the church, those people are treated a little bit differently than somebody who has virtually nothing. You ever notice that? I mean, you guys probably don't have the experience, but I've noticed that over the years that there's almost a different standard sometimes presented. Well, that's what was going on here in Pergamos with the Nicolaitans. You know, they had brought in, it had become a full-fledged doctrine within the church, but nobody wanted to say much about it because the people that were promoting it, they were making the large donations, you know, they had the money, they had control, they had power, maybe they were in leadership positions. And so nobody wanted to step on any toes. And so what it does is it just festers and promotes compromise to the next stage, right?
Well, God said he also hated the Nicolaitans.
So he hated the deeds of the Nicolaitans.
The deeds, right. He doesn't hate the people. He died for the
It's
people.
just what they
Their
were.
actions.
It's what they have convinced themselves is appropriate, and that's what happens a lot of times. People convince themselves that something is appropriate, even though the root of it may take you all the way back to ancient Babylonian mysteries. But people become comfortable, and they rationalize, right? They like to rationalize the things that they do and believe. I mean, a lot of people, you know, they want to be Christian, they say they're Christian, but then they do unchristian things or promote unchristian thinking. And God says, I hate hypocrisy. Isn't that really what it is, hypocrisy? Etc. Okay, repent or else I'll come to you quickly. Will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. So the sword is the word of God. And so the word of God will stand against any hypocritical thinking and hypocrisy. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes will I give some of the hidden manna to eat. The hidden manna. Hidden, what's he talking about, hidden manna? Where was the hidden manna kept in Israel?
Heaven,
Huh?
the manner that, well,
I mean, why is he talking about hidden manna? Because remember, manna would rain down from the sky to be all over the ground.
for
You
the
just went out and collected
children
it.
of Israel.
But where was the hidden manna?
And the,
In the ark?
In the Ark of the Covenant. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. She gets a gold star. In the Ark of the Covenant.
Well, it wasn't in there to begin with, was it?
No, it was put in there.
Whenever it come down from heaven,
Right.
they gathered it and ate it.
A bowl of it was put in there. But what was supposed to happen to the manna if you try to keep it over a day?
It would rot,
It would
spoil.
rot, the
Get
steak would
worms.
spoil. Okay.
flesh.
But what happened when they went out and collected it on the sixth day?
Well, it would be good
Keep for
through the Sabbath.
It would keep good over every week.
That's
A
not-
miracle took place over the Sabbath, so that they didn't have to go out on the Sabbath and collect it.
Collect.
It would
If
stay.
they did, it
It
would
would stay
go
edible.
bad.
It wouldn't go bad. But if they did that on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, whatever, it would, and they tried to collect double, it would end up stinking, right? Right. And of course, God is doing that. He's teaching them about that before they ever get to Mount Sinai. What does that
Teaching
tell
about
you?
the Sabbath too.
So what does that tell you? This is before they actually received the Ten Commandment law written by him, and
He was
so forth.
teaching them to keep holy.
Teaching them about the
Sabbath
principle.
day.
Right, the principle that's
Teaching about the
always
Sabbath too.
that's always existed, right? So he's teaching them about that.
Well, how was they making the children of Israel eat things sacrificed to the idols? What was they? Was it a different kind of food or just something they wasn't supposed to eat?
What's that? Oh, the things sacrificed to idols?
Yeah,
Right.
things sacrificed to the idols.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely a no-no.
Well, yeah, so but what was they was, worshiping the idols. It didn't have anything to do with what the food was it? they're sacrificing it to the idol.
Right. Well, there are two considerations. One thing is that a lot of times food sacrificed to idols was unclean, and so from a Hebrew perspective, you wouldn't want to partake of it anyway.
But
Well,
from
it
the-
would
from
be
the traditional-
unclean if they sacrificed it to the idol.
Pardon me?
I said that would make it unclean if they was sacrificing it to the
Correct.
idol.
It made it unclean in the Jewish traditional sense. But
Okay.
scripturally, having it sacrificed to the idols didn't make any difference as far as the quality or the content of the meat was
Sacrificing to
concerned.
idols is pretty useless anyways. You're just wasting
Right.
good meat.
And see, when you were in the marketplace, you didn't have any control necessarily over what that merchant had done or where that meat had come from.
Right.
So you had to kind of take what was there. And that became a real issue in the church because some of them were very strict and said, oh, this has been offered to idols, we can't touch it.
Right.
And that's why Paul said, you know, go with your conscience sake on that. You know, if you can eat with this without disturbing your conscience, go ahead and do so. There's nothing wrong.
Or becoming a stumbling block for
Or, you know,
somebody
someone-
else.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, be sensitive to others in regards to that. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. And of course also a white stone. Why a white stone? What is he saying here?
A white stone?
Yeah. The other thing that existed in Pergamus that I didn't mention earlier was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court for the entire region resided in Pergamus. So they had not only a large treasury there, and they had, you know, a large library and universities and medical and all that, but they also, this was the seat of the Supreme Court. All right? And in the Supreme Court, one of the things that they would do when they would issue a verdict is they would put out a white stone or a
Blackstone.
black stone.
Which is where the blackball term comes from.
Right.
Being blackballed meant you were voted
Blackballed.
against.
Right.
Ever heard that
voted
term?
against. So you were either, so you either got a white or a black stone, and of course, because of all that history and all the things that are there, Jesus is basically saying, if you are an overcomer, guess what? You get a white stone. No matter what kind of social status you have, no matter how you were brought up, no matter what kind of education you have, I say you get a white stone.
So should we say instead of getting a golden star, you get a white
Get
stone?
a white stone. And on that stand, a new name written, right? Which no one knows except him who received it. So a new name. And so what does all that mean? A new name, a white stone, hidden manna to eat. What is he saying there?
Almost seems like he'll give you the insight, like the deeper information, just thinking in terms of the symbolism. You know, like the manna being bread being the word,
Right.
kind of thing. The hidden
And coming
manna,
from the ark, meaning the law,
Yeah.
specifically.
So like it's almost
Yeah.
like the things that are hidden to people who don't look for them, kind of thing.
Yeah, he's saying if you reverence my law, guess what? You win. No
I
matter.
think it also is the implication of a fresh start because the book of
Fresh
Revelation,
start.
the end times, is about judgment.
Right, and a new start.
And so what he's saying is, I will judge you innocent. I will give you a new name, which is a fresh start without the taint of whatever your past history was.
New body.
Your
Right.
bodies, right. And then food, the manna,
the miracle manna.
heavenly food to provide for your needs, to
Yeah.
keep you alive. If it kept them alive for 40 years in the wilderness, it would
Yeah,
definitely
miracle food.
do what
So
we
now
need.
you have a miracle life, transformed life. So, pretty cool. So what are the lessons? What are the lessons that we find out at Pergamus here? We got just a few minutes. What are the two lessons? I actually looked at two of them here. The two important lessons.
Don't compromise.
Okay, now how could you say that differently? How could you say that differently? I wrote it down a little bit different than that, even though that's what it means,
What does it say again?
the lesson. And I wrote down
No, I'm
mixing
saying by saying it differently, say what differently?
compromise. What is a compromise? it's mixing truth
And error.
and error together.
Not always.
Okay,
Not always. Compromise isn't necessarily mixing evil and good. Compromise just means that you're meeting in the middle and agreeing that you can let go of your different viewpoints and mix together. But that doesn't necessarily mean good and evil, it just means differing.
Or it means you do with what you have.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean a mixture.
Compromise. Instead of eating beef, you eat pork. Not meat.
I mean, it can mean a mixture under the right context.
Yeah.
Well, a compromise could be you and your sibling both want the last cookie, you both eat half. It's compromise.
Yeah.
But the compromise can most definitely be bad if.
Oh, yeah.
you're
I wasn't saying
choosing
they're
to
bad, I was just saying they
ignore-
also can be.
Compromise. Do this or I'll kill you. Okay.
Like
Well, with the cookie illustration,
compromising the seventh day for another one,
yeah, using the cookie illustration, instead of getting the whole, you get less than the whole. Right? You don't get the whole cookie, you get less than the whole cookie. So in that sense, you are mixing what you should have gotten with what you did get. Okay. But the other lesson I have here is partaking of the hidden manna. And what does that really mean? It really means utilizing what God has made available through His Word and making it applicable in your own lives, so that it becomes a witness for others. And that's what what He's really called us to do, is just to lift Him up, right? Not that people need to look to us for anything, but once He's lifted up, they look to Him. Just like we talked about with Moses lifting up the serpent. That's what it was about. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto myself. Okay? And so that's really, I think, what it means by partaking of the hidden manna. It gives us the power and the ability to lift Him up for the world to behold. And so I think that's the lesson, is compromise is definitely something that should be avoided. And it's only avoided as we learn the principles that exist in God's Word, right? And as we follow the principles in His Word, compromise takes a back seat. True principles of Christianity were sacrificed to accommodate pagan beliefs. That was the summary.
I don't think you should compromise for belief.
That was the summary he came up with in this book here. True principles of Christianity were sacrificed to accommodate pagan beliefs. That's what Constantine did.
Yeah.
Right?
He compromised because the Sabbath and Sunday were too much to keep, so he compromised by removing Saturday.
Right. So what would be easier? Would it be easier to try to get all of the Christians to convert to paganism, or for the pagans to convert to Christianity? You know, what would be the
Yeah, one of them had a
Path of
feast,
least
one of them had
resistance.
a fast.
Right. So in order to unify his kingdom, this
He
is
got rid of the less
direction-
popular day,
Right. This is
the narrow path.
So anyway, lots to consider with Pergamus. Pergamus very much is like our culture, society today. Everything was there. They had it all, and then they had nothing if they weren't true Christians. And that's the way it is in our society. We can have everything and nothing. Okay, well, E, our time is gone. Why don't you close us in prayer, if you will. Let's go ahead and bow our heads for prayer.
Lord, we want to thank you so much for this time that you've allowed us to study together and to spend this time looking into your word. We want to ask that the things that we've studied today may impress our minds and stick with us for the rest of the day, and that we may carefully consider the information that we have studied together. And of course, we ask that we can further be made your examples, and through these studies, better understand what your will is for us and what you would have us to do as your children and as your people. I want to ask for your blessings for the rest of the day, especially over the food as well. That you'll help us to have a good fellowship time and that our minds can be focused on you for the rest of the day as well. This is my prayer in your Son's name.
Amen. Okay, so we're just recording, right?
Yeah.
We're not streaming. All right, so I hope you guys have a great week, and when you get a chance to watch the videos, I hope they're a blessing to you. Take care, and we'll see you next time.